Hello, thank you for watching this video. In this video I'm going to tell you the story of my journey to faith and present the evidence that I found on that journey from being an atheist to a Christian, and what evidence I found that made me to put my trust in Jesus. I first want to thank people who've commented on the previous video that I've done. I particularly want to thank the Chids. You seem a very well researched chap, very intelligent. I'm assuming you're a chap, I don't know. Thank you for your comments. Hopefully some of what I say today will be useful. And I particularly like to speak to you because it appears you're a Christian who's become atheist. So I'm particularly interested to link up with people who have gone from Christianity to being an atheist, because that's the complete opposite journey to what I've done. And I'm curious what it was that made you go from a believer to a non-believer, given that it was the evidence that I found that made me go the other way. So, and that extends to anyone watching this. John Hammond, thank you for your comments. You asked for some hard evidence. Well, I can't give you concrete hard evidence, and I'll explain that later, no more than you can give concrete hard evidence of that there isn't a God. But I'll show you what evidence I've got, and then it's up to you whether you decide to believe it or not. And just make sure you got that bucket nearby, you'll get the joke. Rusty Walker, you video critique of the last video. Again, thank you. I was amazed when I saw that. I thought, wow. Maybe do the same on this one, perhaps. And thank you for the encouragement from Modern Day Hysteria. Very, very kind. Before I start, I want to give you a parable, because this is very important. In order for this to really for Jesus to have impact on your life, you have to be open to the possibility that he could have an impact on your life. Now, my journey, I was always very open, and I was looking for the evidence, and I was by no means just going to accept this. Far from it. In fact, when I was doing my Alpha course, I was the atheist who was questioning everything and knocking back all the arguments. And I think that's very important that we do that, because when you do that, you start to see the flimsiness of your own arguments and your own position. So, yeah, very important to do that. But you have to be open. You have to be open to the possibility that what you're hearing could be true. If you listen to this and you're, well, what this guy's going to say, he's just some mad Christian guy, whatever he says, I'm simply going to debunk it. Well, I'll save you the time. I'm sure you're a busy person. Don't bother watching any further, because if you're just going to watch this simply to debunk everything and have your heart closed and your mind closed, why don't you watch something else? Okay, or you may as well go and have a cup of tea. So I just ask that you be open-minded. I'm going to give you the parable of the dead man. So there's a guy who thinks that he's dead, and he lives with his parents, and his parents become very concerned about him, because he tells his parents, I'm dead, I've died. So they take him to the doctor, and they say to the doctor, look, our son, he thinks he's dead, you need to show him that he's not dead. And doctor speaks to the boy, and he says, I'm dead. And the doctor says, well, you're not dead, and I'm going to prove to you that you're not dead. So he takes him down to the mortuary, he shows him all the dead bodies, and the doctor says, dead people don't bleed. Okay, they cut a dead corpse, it doesn't bleed. He gives them loads of textbooks, heart stops, dead people do not bleed. Finally, the boy says, okay, dead people don't bleed. I get it, doc, dead people don't bleed, but I'm still dead. So the doctor thinks, right, I've got him. So the doctor takes this man's hand, and he puts a cut in it, and he bleeds. And the boy says, oh my goodness, dead people do bleed. So my point is, if you already know the answer, then don't bother watching any further, really. You've got to be open-minded to what I say, as I was when I did Alpha. Do question. Absolutely, you should question. You must question. In fact, the Bible tells us to question. But do it with an open heart and an open mind. The Bible, Job 12:7, and this is where the Bible tells us to question and to look at the natural world around us and to question it, really. This is just one quote. I'm sure there's others. I'm not a biblical scholar, but this is one I'm going to give you now. So Job 12:7, but ask the animals and they will teach you, or the birds in the sky and they will tell you. That's just the oldest book in the Bible, and it's telling us to look at the natural world around us, to look for signs of God, and to look and be scientific. Research it, look at it, question it. Okay. I've done some notes here. So set the frame of reference. Okay, now I said earlier, it's going to be, I cannot give you 100% categorical hard evidence in a scientific sense that God exists. It's impossible to do that in the current world. Now the Bible tells us that Jesus will be coming back. When he does that, I'll give you 100% evidence that Jesus exists. But until he does, I cannot do that. Now, if you think therefore God doesn't exist, then I just want to give you a context. If you look at this as a scientific question, you're looking at it in the wrong way, really. You need to look at this as almost like a law court. So in a law court, someone is brought into they're being accused of a crime, and the evidence is presented. Now that evidence is then judged by the jury, and then on the balance of probability they decide whether the person is guilty or innocent. So that's the kind of evidence I'm going to be giving today. Okay, you've got to decide by faith. Okay, you've got to decide by faith whether Jesus and the evidence for Jesus is good or not good. On balance of probability of what I say, is there a case for Jesus? Okay, now that's good for a court of law, it's good for a murder case, and that's the kind of evidence I'm going to give you right now. Okay, the problem, I think, is that a lot of atheists are looking for scientific evidence for the existence of Jesus, and that's not the kind of evidence you're going to find. You're just not going to find that. So if you're looking for scientific evidence of Jesus, I can understand why you're an atheist, because you're just not going to find that. The evidence for Jesus it's more a judicial evidence. It's the kind of evidence that you would get in a court of law. Okay, so that's the frame of reference from which I'm going to be speaking to you. Okay, and by the way, as atheists, you can't disprove the existence of God, and I'm sure you would agree with that. Now, the reason I can't prove as well is because God exists outside of time and space, and science exists within time and space. So you cannot use a tool that's restricted by time and space to prove something that exists outside of time and space. Okay. I had a comment about the soft sciences. Now you can use the soft sciences, and I'm going to present some cases of a case of the soft sciences for the existence, not so much of Jesus, but the existence of an afterlife. Okay, which doesn't prove Jesus, but it proves an afterlife. Okay. And the other thing to bear in mind is whether you're an atheist or whether you're a Christian, it's your opinion of the world, okay? It's your faith. The Bible tells us it is by faith that we follow Christ, okay? And it's our opinion of how the world is. So as an atheist, I had an opinion of how the world works. As a Christian, that opinion changes, okay? And it's just an opinion. So atheists don't hold the trump card on this. I think sometimes I get the impression that atheists think they hold a trump card. Oh, I've got science on my side. There's a lot of scientists who are Christian, okay, who are significantly more intelligent than I am and probably than you are, okay? And there's a lot of scientists who are also atheists, okay? But they just have different opinions on things, okay? So we do not need to throw out science to believe in God. In fact, it was logic that brought me to faith in God. What I want to do is use evolution and creation as a template by which I want to show you that you don't have to throw out logic and science to become a Christian. I think some atheists think that you do. I'm here to tell you that you do not need to do that. Okay, in fact, it is logic and thinking that brought me to faith, and hopefully you watching this as an atheist, it will bring you to faith, logic and thinking. But you must be open-hearted, you must have an open mind. So hopefully this will illustrate what I mean. So evolution. So we're going to start with a single cell creature with DNA in it, a single cell organism, okay, becomes a multi-cell organism full of DNA and RNA, okay. The environment around it then determines that it needs to adapt to that environment. So let's say, for example, it's a particularly cold environment, then the DNA that doesn't allow it to live within that cold environment is selected out, and the DNA that can exist within that environment is selected in. Okay. Anyway, this carries on, and eventually we end up with a fish. Okay, because the environment around is allowing that the DNA to become more and more complex, to build more and more complex creatures. That fish then crawls up on the land. Okay, that's a land animal. Okay, and the gills of the fish are transformed into a lung. And we have lung fish that can do that, even today apparently, that can come out of the water, live on the land, but also live in the water. Okay. Then eventually we have monkeys and man. Okay. So evolution goes from the creation of the first single cell, and then over time the environment molds the DNA, and we end up with monkeys, and the man evolves out of those monkeys. Now that's what I thought as a atheist, that's what I was taught, and that's what I think now. Okay. However, my understanding of this has developed and deepened, and my questioning of this process has deepened. Okay. So at some point, this first single cell organism had to appear. Now, the atheist will tell you that it's just pure, the conditions just became right at just the right moment, with just the right conditions, with just the right chemicals, and so on and so forth, and our first cell was produced. Now, no scientist has yet done this, and we know all the components and the building blocks, and yet no scientist has yet been able to do this. So the conditions required to produce that first single cell were very, very narrow. Okay, it was such narrow conditions to produce that first single cell that no scientist has yet been able to do that. Okay, now at some point in the future it may be possible to do that. Okay, but my suggestion to you is that this situation it's such a narrow window of possibility to do that my suggestion is that a creator engineered the universe to produce those conditions. Okay, now my atheistic view of it was that it was just random luck that the universe came together in such a way that that point of creation was allowed to occur. So it is my opinion that it wasn't just pure luck, that God, outside of time and space, engineered it and created the conditions that ended up with the first cell. As an atheist, I thought it was pure random chance. I would argue, actually, that it makes more sense that a creator would come to that point rather than it being random chance. Just my view on that. Okay. I want to tell you about my own journey to faith. And this is my own personal experience of how I came to faith. And hopefully, if I can explain what happened for me, perhaps you will hear something in this, and perhaps it may resonate for you. So I had to question my atheism when I came across near-death experience accounts. Okay. Now, as an atheist, I thought all human consciousness resided within my brain. Okay, there was no human consciousness. I have no consciousness outside of my brain. Okay, so it would be impossible for me to be able to retell people what they were doing in another location unless I was in that location, physically in that location. So near-death experience accounts, and there's lots of them on the internet, and I really encourage you to look at them. Okay, I really do. But there are many accounts of near-death experience where people who are clinically dead have had these experiences, out-of-body experiences, and they have been able to tell people conversations that they were having in the room next door, or family members at home. They can tell them what book they were reading at the time, even what passage they were reading at the time. Now, as an atheist, you cannot explain out-of-body experience, because this is where your consciousness is. How can you possibly explain that out-of-body experience? Now, an inadequate atheistic explanation is that the dying brain releases certain hormones within itself to make the death experience more comfortable for people, and gives these vivid hallucinations. Now, that explanation might explain some accounts of near-death experience, but it cannot explain how somebody can tell a doctor who is rushing into the hospital to resuscitate them what they were wearing before they put their scrubs on when they came in to theatre. That's impossible to explain, because that out-of-body experience of that person, they've seen them coming into the hospital, they've told them what they were wearing. That is proof of an out-of-body experience. There's a doctor called Eben Alexander who is a brain doctor, a brain surgeon, who had this experience himself. He had, if you look him up, he had a brain disease. I can't think of the name of the disease now, but it was a brain disease. Look him up; it will tell you. He was admitted to intensive care. They had scanners on his brain. They were monitoring his brain activity, and his brain activity, he was brain dead. The brain activity was completely knocked out, and when he came back, he was resuscitated. He came back. He was on intensive care. He was unconscious for weeks, and his brain activity was knocked out for weeks. But when he came back, he told people of his experience, of his going to another realm, this very vivid experience that he had, more vivid than this experience, this life experience. And there's no way you could explain that through his brain activity, because there was no brain activity, or very limited brain activity, and they were monitoring his brain. And when he came back, he could tell them of this experience of flying on tops of butterflies and all sorts of weird experiences. Well, if that was within his brain, then his brain would have been firing. There would have been activity within his brain. But there was no brain activity. There were charts showing there was no brain activity. So that starts to make me question then, is human consciousness in here, or does it reside out there? I mean, where is human consciousness? That's what it makes me start to question. And that's very strong evidence. I live in Southampton in England, and I'm a physiotherapist, and my local hospital, Southampton General Hospital, they are doing research on near-death experience. They're putting things at the top of lockers so that when people come into the resus room and they resuscitate them, they're asking them, did you experience anything? And if they say yes, the problem is a lot of people with these experiences keep quiet because they don't want anyone to think they're completely bonkers. But if they say yes, they'll ask them, did you see anything? And what they're looking for is, have they seen things that have been put at the top of lockers which are out of eyesight but can be seen if you're hovering up in the corner of the room. Okay, so that really got me questioning my atheistic views of the world. Please do look at near-death experience, look at Eben Alexander. There's lots of accounts, lots of other accounts. Do look at them. Let's talk about the Bible. Now, one of the comments I got in a previous video was, just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's written in a Harry Potter book, I think, who do I credit that to? That was to Rusty. Rusty, I think, said that. So Rusty Walker, your comment was, just because it's written in the Bible doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's written in a Harry Potter book doesn't make it true. Well, you're quite right. Just because it's written in a Harry Potter book doesn't make it true. But the Bible isn't a Harry Potter book. The Bible is 4,000 years old, at least. Certainly the Old Testament, parts of the Old Testament. And there's archaeological evidence which you can look at to back up what's certainly in the New Testament, which is about 2,000 years old, to back up what is written within this book. Okay. I would also question whether a Harry Potter book is still going to be in circulation in 4,000 years from now. It might be, possibly, but I doubt it. Okay, the Bible is still in circulation. So one of the apostles, the archaeological evidence, one of the apostles was traveling around, and he names different locations, and they can go back to those locations, dig up the ground and check the names of places, look at his journey, and you can literally dig up the ground to look for evidence for what is being said. Now, you can't prove 100% everything that's being said is correct, but if you've got 10% or 20% where you can cross-reference it and check that information, then if that 10 to 20% is proved accurate, then you have to, by faith, accept the other parts within that Bible. Okay. The other thing also actually to say about the Bible is the Bible is not a scientific journal to tell you how things are done. It is a message from God to tell you why things are done. Okay. However, you can take certain scientific sort of models, if you like, from it, from how it describes the world, but it's not meant to be a scientific document. And you also have to bear in mind the people that are writing it don't have the knowledge that we have now. So when Genesis was written by Moses, Moses had no idea about outer space and the universe or anything like that, and yet he wrote, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Well, we now know, very recently, that the universe had a beginning, the Big Bang. Now that's a very recent concept. Up until very recently, a lot of people just thought the world has just always been there, the universe has just always been there. And the Bible, 4,000 years ago, the first words within the Bible are describing the Big Bang. Okay? That to me is very, very powerful evidence that you need to take notice of what this book has to say. Its first words are predicting scientific discoveries 4,000 years later. And when Moses wrote that, he had no idea what he was writing. He's just writing what he's inspired to write by God. He would have had not a clue about the Big Bang. And this document, in its very first words, 4,000 years ago, predicting something. I want to talk about the predictive power of the Bible. Okay, I'm going to refer to Psalm 22. Now, Psalm 22 was written, we think, by King David, roughly 500 BC. And there are scrolls of this, the Red Sea scrolls, Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, sorry about that, Dead Sea Scrolls, which have been carbon dated to 100 years before Christ. Okay, but we think this was written, so we've got copies of this 100 years before Christ, but we think it was probably written 500 years before Christ. Okay, so this is carbon dated evidence. Okay, now when Jesus was crucified, one of the last things he said before he died was, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Which is the opening lines of Psalm 22. Now I'm not going to read you the entire psalm, I'm just going to pick out a few points in this. So that it writes in here, "All who see me mock me." Of course, the Roman soldiers mocked him. That's well known. "I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint." The blood of Christ, the letting of his blood was for the forgiveness of our sins. He was bleeding. He was whipped to pieces with whips with bone in them that ripped him to shreds. They pierced my hands and feet. Well, we know he was crucified. They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. The Roman soldiers did just that. They took his clothes and they cast lots for his clothing. Now, the counter argument to this, and I can already hear you saying it, is, well, when they wrote the New Testament, they just sort of manipulated it to fit in with this psalm to make it look, that would fit nicely with that psalm. That's possible. That is quite possible that happened. However, I don't think they would have got away with it, because the New Testament was written within a generation of the death of Christ. So the people writing the New Testament were the people who were there. Okay, they saw it and they wrote it. Okay, it's very, very, in terms of archaeology, is very powerful evidence, because the evidence for Buddha and for other religious leaders, Muhammad, nowhere near as strong as this, but they were there. And I would say to you, do you think they would get away with writing a lie within the lifetime of people who were at the event? So do you think, if you think back to the Lady Diana when she died, if I wrote something and published it and tried to publish it, that when she died she wasn't in Paris, she was actually in London, and she died in a parachuting accident, do you think I would get away with that? I don't think I would. So given that the New Testament was written by people there, and they're circulating these stories during the lifetime of other people who were also there, many of whom were very hostile to Jesus, do you think they would get away with writing something that wasn't a truth? I don't think so. But you have to make your own judgment on that. I recommend John Ankerman, by the way. If you look up John Ankerman on the internet, he's a Christian apologist who has a radio podcast and is very good on the evidence for Christ. Okay. So, realization. So, a big moment for me on my journey to faith was when I realized what it was Jesus was claiming, who he was claiming to be. Now, I knew he was, everyone kind of has heard he's the Son of God. That's what he used to say, I'm the Son of God. Now, as an atheist, I thought, well, we're all the sons and daughters of God. We're all, God's creation, if that's what you want to call it, So I just thought this Jesus guy is just a bit more special than the rest of us, but he's still a person, like human beings, like you or me. But no, Jesus was more than that. And there's the story of Jesus. I don't have the Bible with me. I would read you the story if I did. But there's the story of Jesus speaking to the lady, a Samaritan at the well, and he tells her life. He tells her life story. And in telling her life story, he also tells her that he is God. And she realizes that. And as I'm reading it, I realized it as well. And that was a big shift for me, was the realization that Jesus is claiming to be God. Okay. Now, people claim to be God all the time, but let's be honest, there's a lot of people, some famous people who've claimed to be God, but we don't follow them, do we? And in 4,000 years from now, do you think we'll still remember those people? Will we still remember Jesus? Okay, and one of the reasons we still remember him is because he's still here. So Jesus is God in the flesh. That was a big realization for me on my journey to faith. Now, I researched other religions because one of my big objections to Christianity was, well, okay, if we accept that there's a God, who's to say that it's a Christian God or a Jewish God or a Muslim or a Hindu God? So I thought, well, I better research this, and so I did. And when I researched it, I just found that the evidence for Jesus is very compelling. It's very strong evidence, and I would encourage you to do the exact same. Also, the other thing you have to bear in mind is that whoever you accept as God is the person that you're going to be following. And when I looked at Muhammad, he was basically a war leader. He killed a lot of people. He was a very successful war leader, but he's got a few skeletons. Let's put it that way. He had a wife who was 12 years old, and I just didn't feel like that was the kind of guy I wanted to be following. Buddha, he was a rich prince. He abandoned his wife and his family in order to go on a journey of self-discovery. I'm a father, and that to me just didn't ring quite right, to abandon your family. And Hinduism's got multiple gods, a very ancient religion, but there's no person that walked the planet for Hinduism. There is for Buddha, there is for Islam, there is for Christianity. So given Buddha, Muhammad and Jesus was stand out the greatest one to follow. Also, Buddha and Muhammad never claimed to be God. Jesus did. That's a big difference. The 12 apostles. Now, this was very, very strong for me, incredibly strong evidence for me. So, the story of Jesus, he has the Last Supper, and they come to the Jews come to, the Sadducees come to get him, and his apostles all abandon him. Okay, Peter, the crow cropped 3 times. Peter's denied him. They all denied him before the crucifixion. Okay, he goes to the cross. He's crucified. As far as we know, I think there might have just been one apostle there. No one was there. They all abandoned him. They all left him. And yet, all of the apostles, with the exception of one, died grisly deaths proclaiming Jesus as God. Okay, all of them with the exception of one. They were crucified, thrown off of temples. One of them was crucified upside down, all because they were proclaiming Jesus' name. Now that was very compelling evidence for me. These people who had abandoned him were now dying for him. Now for me, why would you do that? Why would you abandon Christ in one moment, through fear of your own life presumably, and then in the next moment you're giving your life up for him? It doesn't make any sense, does it? Well, to me, the only reason they would do that is if they have seen Christ in the flesh after he has been crucified and he has risen from the dead. And the whole Christian faith revolves around that fact that Jesus rose from the dead. Okay? If Jesus does not rise from the dead, there is no Christian faith. Okay? So on that basis, Christianity is a very bold faith, because without Jesus rising from the dead, it is dead in the water as a faith. Okay? And I believe he did rise from the dead. And I would ask you, as any atheist watching this, and I'm appealing to atheists because I was an atheist, pin down the evidence. Look for the evidence for Jesus Christ rising from the dead. Okay? Go out, do the research. Really pick that apart. Really research that. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Now, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that are going to come your way when I say that, and you're going to have lots of distracting thoughts, okay, that are going to try and pull you away from that one core question. Okay, that is the one core question. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Look at the evidence. Look at the Bible. Look at it as a historic document. Okay. Ask yourself the question, on the balance of probability, did this man Jesus rise from the dead? Okay. There's no doubt that he existed. Okay. Well, let me rephrase that. If there's doubt that Jesus existed, then we have to throw out all ancient history documentation. Okay, we've got to throw the whole lot out. Okay, no more Julius Caesar, no more I'm trying to think of a historic figure now, no more pharaohs, no more ancient history, no more Spartacus. The whole lot has to go. If you don't think Jesus existed, all of it has to go. Okay. So we have to accept. Well, we don't have to accept. I'm going to ask you to accept that Jesus existed, and then really look at, did this person die, and did they? Well, the key question really is, did this person come back to life? Okay. When you research that and look at it, and really look at it with an open mind, when you realise that he did come back to life, and the evidence is very compelling and very strong, you'll be on your way to a new life. I was, and it will be the same for you. You'll start on a new life. Okay. So that was my journey to faith. I want to talk about sin, actually. That was the other thing I wanted to talk about, sin. So as an atheist, I thought the world is fine. It's perfectly formed. What is the problem? I'm not a sinner. I'm a good person. I look after the people around me. I've got a job that helps people. I never considered myself to be a sinner. Now, as a Christian, I look back and I now understand what sin is. And as an atheist, if you take the Bible literally, which I now do, you are breaking the first commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your spirit. I don't want to sound like I'm preaching to you, but if you take that first commandment and look at that, you'll then realize that you are a sinner. Okay? Because I didn't know what I needed saving from. I had no idea what I needed saving from. I didn't get it at all. And I don't claim that I fully get it now, to be perfectly honest with you. But what I do get is that I am a sinner. We are all sinners. And we are just called to, we are just called to find Jesus. Jesus wants you to find him. He wants to reveal himself to you, and then you then have the choice. Okay, you have the choice to decide to follow Jesus or not. So the purpose of my video is not to to try and reveal to you Jesus Christ. The Bible tells us as Christians we become the body of Christ. So right now I am telling you the story of Jesus, and Jesus talking through me to you, and hopefully you're hearing something. And Jesus, by the way, logic will get you to see Jesus, okay, and to look at the resurrection. But what Jesus really wants is your heart. This is about a heart connection. It's not about your mind and logic. You can use your mind and logic to get close, but you're going to have to take a leap of faith to become the follower of Jesus. Okay, it's a heart thing. It's an emotional thing. Okay, Jesus wants that. Okay, well, I hope that's been useful. As I said at the beginning, I am particularly interested. I would love to speak to people who were Christians and are now atheists. They've had the opposite journey to myself. I'd be fascinated to see how that's happened, and what your journey was to go from the place of faith to atheism. Anyway, I hope that's useful. Please post your comments, and I challenge you, Rusty, please do one of your videos again. I'd love you to. Please do. And until next time, thank you.